In the middle of a high-security prison block, surrounded by 30-foot concrete walls and layers of electrified razor wire, there is a sound that shouldn't be there. It isn't the heavy clanging of iron doors or the barking orders of a corrections officer. It is the sound of a teenager's voice. We often think of maximum security prisons as fortresses built for the most hardened adults. But there is a hidden demographic living within these shadow worlds that most people never see. Every year, a significant number of minors are waived into the adult justice system and sent to facilities designed for people 3 times their age. They go from high school classrooms to cell blocks, where the rules of survival are written in sweat and iron. But if you think they are simply tossed into a cage with the general population and left to fend for themselves, the reality is far more complex, controversial, and strictly regulated than any movie would have you believe. In the next hour, we are going to walk through the intake gates and reveal exactly how the system handles a child offender from the second they arrive at a maximum security facility. From the sight and sound separation laws that keep them isolated to the specialized educational programs that take place behind bars. This is the truth about what life is really like for a minor in a world built for grown men. When a minor is sentenced as an adult, the transition to a maximum security facility begins with a massive administrative headache. The prison doesn't just treat them like another number because, legally, they can't. Federal law in many countries, particularly under the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act in the United States, mandates a concept called sight and sound separation. This means that as soon as that teenager steps off the transport bus, the prison staff has to ensure they do not come into any physical or even auditory contact with adult inmates. The intake process for a minor is a ghost-like experience. They are moved through the facility during lockdown periods, when the hallways are cleared of other inmates. While an adult prisoner might be processed in a crowded bullpen, a child offender is often processed in a private room with a specialized team of officers who have been trained in adolescent psychology. They are still strip-searched, they are still shackled, and they are still issued a uniform. But the environment is eerily quiet. For a 16-year-old, the scale of the prison is the first major shock. Everything, the doors, the tables, the ceilings, is oversized, designed to intimidate and contain adults. Standing in that massive intake hall, a teenager often looks jarringly out of place. A visual reminder of the heavy hand of the law. The psychological screening for a minor is the most intense part of day one. While an adult might get a quick 10-minute mental health check, a child offender is evaluated by a team of psychiatrists for hours. Facility directors know that the risk of self-harm is astronomical for minors in adult facilities. They are going through the most volatile years of brain development while being subjected to total isolation. The counselors look for signs of trauma, developmental delays, and survivalist tendencies. The goal is to figure out if this kid is a danger to themselves or if they are likely to be exploited by others. After medical and psych, the minor is moved to what is known as a youthful offender unit. In a maximum security prison, this is usually a small self-contained wing that is physically cut off from the rest of the prison. For the teenager, this unit becomes their entire world. They won't see the main yard, the main dining hall, or the main library for years. It is a prison within a prison, designed to be a protective bubble in a very dangerous ocean. Life inside a youthful offender unit is a bizarre mix of kindergarten-style structure and maximum security stakes. The rooms are the same cold, concrete boxes you'd find anywhere else in the facility, but the hallway walls might be painted in brighter colors to meet state mandates for rehabilitative environments. The daily schedule is mapped out to the minute. Unlike adult inmates who might have long periods of idle time, minors are required by law to be in school. This is one of the biggest surprises for people who study these units. Every morning, the teenagers are marched to a small classroom within their unit, where they work toward a high school diploma. The teachers are often from the local school district, and they have to pass through multiple security checkpoints just to deliver a math lesson. In these classrooms, the pencils are flexible so they can't be used as tools, and the computers have no internet access. It is a high-pressure academic environment, where the students are wearing jumpsuits and the hall monitor is a guard with a pepper spray canister. The social dynamics within a youthful offender unit are incredibly volatile. You are taking a group of impulsive teenagers, many of whom have histories of violence or gang involvement, and putting them in a confined space with zero outside stimulus. The staff-to-inmate ratio is much higher here than in the rest of the prison. The officers who work these units aren't your typical tough guards. They are often chosen for their ability to de-escalate situations with words rather than force. They have to act as parent figures, disciplinarians, and security officers all at once. Because the teenagers can't interact with the adult population, they form a hyper-intense subculture with its own hierarchy. A minor who was a nobody on the streets might try to become a general in the unit to feel some sense of power. Tensions can boil over in seconds, not over money or contraband, but over something as small as a look or a comment about someone's family. The guards have to be constantly vigilant, because a fight in a youthful unit can lead to the entire wing being put on programmatic restriction, meaning no school, no gym, and no phone calls for weeks. Food in the youthful offender unit is another area where the law intervenes. Because their bodies are still growing, child offenders are often entitled to a higher caloric intake and more nutritious meals than the adult population. While the adults in the main dining hall might be eating basic nuke and serve meals, the kids in the youth unit often get extra milk, fresh fruit, and larger portions of protein. This sounds like a perk, but it often becomes a point of contention. The meals are usually delivered to the unit on a cart rather than the kids going to a cafeteria. This means they eat every single meal in the same room where they sleep and study. The lack of variety in their environment can lead to what psychologists call institutional cabin fever. But they are being starved of sensory experience. Exercise is a strictly controlled affair. Federal guidelines mandate that minors get at least 1 hour of large muscle activity every day. In a maximum security prison, this usually happens in a cage or a small fenced-in yard that is strictly for the youth unit. They aren't playing basketball with the 50-year-old lifers. They are playing 4-on-4 with other teenagers under the watchful eyes of multiple guards on the catwalks. This is the only time they get to see the sky without a ceiling in the way. And the intensity of the games is through the roof. It is a way for them to burn off the massive amounts of adrenaline that come from living in a high-stress environment. However, even these recreation periods are monitored for gang signs or kiting, which is the practice of throwing notes over fences to try and communicate with the adult population. Communication with the outside world is the only thing that keeps many of these kids tethered to reality. Minors in maximum security are usually allowed more frequent phone calls and visits than adults, provided their behavior is good. But the visits are different. While an adult might have a contact visit where they can sit at a table with their family, a minor in a high-security facility often has to stay behind glass. Seeing their mother or younger siblings through a thick pane of plexiglass is a crushing experience for a 16-year-old. They have to use a phone to speak, and the glass is covered in smudges and scratches. It is a visual representation of the barrier between their childhood and the adult world they have been forced into. These visits often end in tears, and the cool-down period after a visit is the most dangerous time for conflicts within the unit. One of the most controversial aspects of handling child offenders in adult prisons is the use of solitary confinement. While many states have banned long-term isolation for minors, it is still used under the name punitive segregation, or medical isolation. If a minor becomes too violent for the youthful offender unit to handle, the administration faces a dilemma. They can't put the kid in the main block, and they can't let them stay in the youth wing where they are hurting others. Often, the only answer is a lockdown cell where the teenager is alone for 23 hours a day. The scientific community has been vocal about the damage this does to a developing brain. Without social interaction, a teenager's sense of time and self begins to fracture. Some facilities have tried to replace this with booth-based learning, where the kid is placed in a glass-enclosed cubicle so they can still see a teacher and other students but can't physically reach them. It is a high-tech solution to an ancient problem of control. As the child offender approaches their 18th birthday, a new kind of anxiety sets in. This is the transition period. In the weeks leading up to their birthday, the protective bubble of the youthful offender unit begins to pop. They are given orientation sessions, which are essentially warnings about what life is like in the big house, the general population. They are told that the extra milk, the brighter colors, and the specialized school programs are over. The day they turn 18, they are moved. For many, this is the most terrifying day of their lives. They go from being the big fish in the small youth unit to being the youngest, most vulnerable targets in a population of thousands. The prison tries to mitigate this by placing them in transitional blocks with older, non-violent inmates. But the culture shock is often overwhelming. They have spent 2 or 3 years in a managed environment, And suddenly, they are in a world where you have to look out for yourself and navigate complex social codes they've only heard stories about. The educational programs in these units are surprisingly successful because there are so few distractions. Many child offenders who were failing out of school on the outside actually thrive academically. Some even earn college credits while in the youthful offender unit. This creates a strange paradox. The prison is the only place where these kids have ever had a stable schedule, 3 meals a day, and teachers who are literally forced to be there for them. Some former youthful offenders have said that the unit was the first time they felt safe from the chaos of their neighborhoods, even though they were surrounded by the most dangerous people in the state. This highlights the failure of the outside support systems, but it doesn't diminish the reality of the prison environment. The staff who work with child offenders are under immense pressure to prevent grooming. This is when adult inmates or even unscrupulous staff members try to establish a relationship with a minor for the purpose of exploitation. The sight and sound laws are meant to prevent this, but the human element is hard to control. Notes can be passed, signals can be flashes through windows, and messages can be sent through the trustees, adult inmates who have jobs cleaning the hallways. The prison administration has to run constant audits to ensure the separation is absolute. If a minor is compromised, the legal liability for the state is in the millions, and the facility can be shut down. This makes the youthful offender unit one of the most scrutinized and by-the-book environments in the entire correctional system. The graduation from the youthful unit to the adult population is a rite of passage that many don't survive psychologically. Some kids deliberately get into trouble in the youth unit just to be moved to mental health observation, hoping to delay the move to the general population, spending every waking second lifting weights so they don't look like children when they walk into the main yard. The system is designed to punish, but for a child offender, the punishment is often a form of accelerated aging. They lose their adolescence in a place where showing any sign of vulnerability, the hallmark of being a child, can be a mistake. Let's talk about the specific rehabilitative programs offered to minors, because they are seen as having a better chance at change than a 50-year-old career criminal. Youthful offenders get the lion's share of the prison's resources. They have access to intensive thinking for a change classes, anger management, and vocational training in things like barbering or carpentry. The hope of the administration is that by the time they are moved into the adult population at 18, they will have the maturity and the skills to avoid getting caught up in the internal politics of the prison. It is a race against time, trying to build a stable personality before the street culture of the main yard takes over. The medical needs of child offenders also provide a unique challenge. Teenagers are notorious for having irregular sleep patterns and fluctuating hormones. In a maximum security environment, sleep is already hard to come by. The constant noise and light can lead to chronic sleep deprivation, which in a teenager manifests as extreme irritability and poor decision-making. The medical staff has to manage a population that is physically healthy but hormonally on fire. This often leads to a high rate of prescriptions for mood stabilizers and sleep aids, sparking a debate about whether the system is chemically managing children rather than helping them. The families of child offenders are often the forgotten victims of this process. When a child is sent to an adult prison, the family has to navigate a system that is not designed for them. Juvenile facilities usually have family engagement coordinators, but adult prisons do not. A parent trying to visit their 16-year-old son in a maximum security facility has to go through the same grueling security checks, background audits, and no-contact rules as the wife of a gang leader. This can lead to families giving up, which is the worst possible outcome for the minor. Without a connection to the outside world, a child offender stops seeing themselves as a member of society and starts seeing themselves only as a prisoner. The legal rights of minors in adult prisons are constantly being litigated. Lawyers for these children argue that the adult crime, adult time philosophy ignores the biological reality of the adolescent brain. They point to the fact that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and long-term planning, isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. From a scientific perspective, sending a 16-year-old to a maximum security prison is like punishing someone for not being able to fly when they don't have wings yet. This hasn't changed the laws much, but it has changed how the units are run. There is a much greater focus now on trauma-informed care, recognizing that most child offenders were victims of abuse or neglect long before they became perpetrators. In some maximum security prisons, they have tried mentorship programs, where highly vetted, Older, non-violent adult inmates are allowed limited supervised contact with the youthful offenders. The idea is that an elder who has spent 20 years behind bars can give better advice to a kid than a 25-year-old guard ever could. He can explain the mistakes he made and warn the kid about the traps of prison life. These programs are extremely rare because they fly in the face of the sight and sound laws, but where they exist, the results are promising. It provides the minor with a roadmap for survival that doesn't involve violence or gang affiliation. The reality of the yard for a minor when they finally turn 18 is the stuff of nightmares. In a maximum security facility, the yard is where the power structures are most visible. Groups are divided by geography, affiliation, and history. An 18-year-old walking out there for the first time is a new recruit for everyone. The pressure to join a group for protection is almost impossible to resist. The transition from the managed environment of the youth unit to the predatory environment of the main yard is where the system often fails. The kid has been taught thinking for a change in a classroom, but on the yard, the rules are different. This re-entry into the adult population is the moment of truth. Statistics show that child offenders who serve time in adult prisons have a much higher rate of returning to the system than those who stay in the juvenile system. This school-to-prison pipeline becomes a youth-to-adult prison pipeline. The environment of a maximum security facility is so focused on containment and security that the nuances of adolescent development are often lost. A kid learns how to be a good prisoner rather than a good citizen. They learn how to mask their feelings, how to anticipate threats, and how to use aggression to prevent victimization. These are skills that are useful for surviving a 30-year sentence, but they are disastrous for someone who hopes to get out and start a life at 25. The youthful offender units are also expensive. It costs 3 to 4 times as much to house a minor in a maximum security prison as it does an adult. This is due to the requirements for education, specialized medical care, and increased staffing for separation. This financial reality has led some states to reconsider their wive-up laws, realizing that they are spending millions of dollars to create more hardened criminals. However, for those already in the system, the money is often spent on hardening the environment rather than softening the approach. They won't care about the consequences of their actions inside. The staff has to work overtime to give these kids small wins and short-term goals to keep their hope from turning into apathy. The biological impact of the environment is also a concern. High-security prisons are sensory deprivation zones. There is no nature, no soft textures, and very few natural colors. This lack of stimulus can lead to permanent changes in how the brain processes information. Studies on prisonization show that the longer a minor spends in this environment, the harder it is for their brain to adapt to the chaos of the outside world. Things like traffic, crowds, and complex social interactions. They become wired for the prison, making life on the outside almost impossible to navigate. The use of incentive-based housing is one way the units try to manage behavior. A kid who stays out of trouble and does well in school might get a cell with a better view, which usually just means a window to the parking lot or extra time on the phone. For an adult, these are small things. They are everything. It is a way to replicate the privileges they would have had at home. The problem is that in a maximum security environment, these incentives are often taken away for the sins of the whole group. If one kid in the unit gets into a fight, the whole unit might lose their pizza night. This collective punishment is a staple of prison life, but it breeds an intense resentment in minors that can lead to more violence. The role of the warden in a maximum security prison that houses minors is part politician, part administrator, and part warden. They have to answer to the public who wants tough on crime stances, but they also have to answer to the courts and the advocates who want to ensure the kids aren't being mistreated. Every minor in their facility is a ticking time bomb, both in terms of security risks and legal liability. This leads to a culture of hyper-regulation, where every move the kid makes is documented. If a kid trips in the yard, there's an incident report. If they skip a meal, there's a welfare check. This level of scrutiny can make the teenager feel like they are under a microscope, further isolating them from a normal sense of self. As we look at the big picture, the handling of child offenders in maximum security prisons is a testament to the power of our laws and the limits of our institutions. We have created a system that is incredibly efficient at separating and containing, but we are still struggling with the core question: what happens to a child when you raise them in a tomb? The Youthful Offender Unit is an attempt to answer that question with a compromise: separation, education, and protection. but it is a compromise that takes place within walls built for punishment. The sight and sound laws are the thin line that keeps this system from descending into total chaos. Without them, the exploitation of minors by adult inmates would be rampant. However, these laws also create a level of isolation that is its own form of trauma. A teenager can be in a building with 2,000 people and not speak to a single person besides a guard for months. This enforced solitude is a weight that builds up day after day. The suicide watch is a frequent reality in these units. If a kid shows even a hint of desperation, they are moved to a safe cell where they are stripped of their clothes and given a suicide smock, a heavy, green garment that can't be torn or folded. They are placed in a room with a camera and a guard who marks a log every 15 minutes. For a teenager who is already struggling with their identity, being placed in one of these cells is the ultimate indignity. It is meant to save their life, but many say it makes them feel less like a person and more like an object. The transition to 18 also means the loss of the youthful offender label in the eyes of the law. They are now officially adults, and the special protections are over. This legal birthday is a harsh reminder that the justice system treats age as a binary. One day you are a child to be protected, the next you are an adult to be discarded. The reality of development is that there is no difference between a person at 17 years and 364 days and a person at 18, but the prison system doesn't have room for nuance. It's clear that the handling of child offenders is one of the most difficult and hidden challenges in the correctional world. It is a system of hyper-isolation and hyper-regulation aimed at protecting the vulnerable from the predatory, but it takes place in a landscape that is fundamentally hostile to development. The minor in a maximum security prison is living a life of waiting. Waiting for school to start, waiting for a phone call, waiting to turn 18, and waiting for a chance to prove they are more than the worst thing they've ever done. It is a world where high-stakes security meets the messy, emotional reality of youth. The teenagers in these units are the youngest residents of the most secure places on Earth, a status that no one wants. Their presence in these facilities is a challenge to our ideas of justice, rehabilitation, and the potential for change. While the concrete walls and razor wire remain unchanged, the kids inside them are changing every day, growing up in a place that was never meant for them. The system continues to churn. Buses arrive, gates open, and the separation begins again. For the staff, it is a daily struggle to maintain the balance. For the families, it is a long, painful wait. It is a journey through a world of shadows, trying to find a way to stay whole in a system that is designed to break and contain. The teenagers behind the maximum security walls are the world's most hidden population, serving their time in a prison within a prison, while the rest of the world remains blissfully unaware of the youthful voices echoing in the concrete blocks.